On a warm late April evening, a 50-year-old woman, let's call her Maria, went out on an errand, not realizing how that night would end for her. Aware that it was already quite late, Maria stayed alert. Her watchful eye did not miss a young man in a bright jacket with red and white stripes, who had clearly noticed her and began following her from the opposite side of the street. Maria hurriedly dialed the emergency services number. She asked the operator for help, explaining that she was being followed by a stranger. While staying on the line with the operator, the woman crossed the street and picked up a stone from the ground. Clearly not a timid person, Maria confronted the young man directly, demanding to know what he wanted and why he was following her. Moments later, the operator heard a sharp exclamation, a woman's scream, and then the sounds of a struggle. The operator did not yet know it, but at that very moment, the man dragged Maria onto a vacant lot. The dispatcher tried to encourage her, saying that help was already on the way. But sounds coming through the receiver left no doubt about what was happening. The man was committing violent acts against Maria. The operator then dispatched every available unit to help the woman. Not only patrol officers, but also canine units with dogs and even a helicopter. All of them rushed to the specified area, trying to locate the victim and her attacker. Meanwhile, Maria, still clutching the stone in her hand, twisted free and struck her assailant on the head and face. His blood splattered onto her jacket. The sound of sirens was rapidly approaching. The attacker's head was bleeding, and he realized he needed to flee if he did not want to end up in prison. On Monday, April 16, 2012, 9-year-old Christopher Martinez entered the school building in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was a student. Christopher's face was wet with tears, and his teacher asked him what had happened. The boy shocked her by saying that his mother and sister were dead and that his father was wandering around the house covered in blood. Christopher added that his 4-year-old brother, Alejandro, had been left at home with their father. The teacher reported the boy's statement to the school officer, who then called the police. When the first officers arrived, they took Christopher back home. On the way, the boy explained that his family consisted of his father, Arturo Martinez, his mother, Yadi, his 10-year-old sister Carla, himself, and his youngest brother, 4-year-old Alejandro. Upon arriving, the officers cautiously looked into the house through a window and saw that the walls, floors, and furniture were splattered with blood. Amid this horrific scene, a child about 4 years old was wandering around. The police tried to coax the child outside, but at that very moment, the front door flew open and a man appeared in the doorway. Based on Christopher's description, the officers were facing 39-year-old Arturo Martinez, the father of the family. He was covered in blood, mostly dried. He looked confused, as if he did not understand where he was or what was happening. However, the officers could not know whether he was pretending. They ordered him to stop and show his hands, but the man did not respond to either their commands or their questions. The officers had no idea what the man intended to do. Why was he refusing to answer? Was he afraid of incriminating himself and decided to remain silent? After all, if the boy was not mistaken, his mother and sister were dead, while the father was alive, covered in dried blood and behaving irrationally. The police had no choice but to treat Arturo as a suspect. He was not taken to the station immediately only because he had injuries. Accompanied by an officer, he was transported to the nearest hospital. The police placed little Alejandro in the car with his older brother. There, the children were safe while detectives entered and searched the house. At that point, the police knew what they were dealing with only from the words of a child. There were no signs of forced entry on the door, but beyond the door, a true nightmare awaited them. Blood was everywhere. There was an enormous amount of it, and the attack had not been confined to a single room. Arturo's wife and the children's mother, 38-year-old Ignacia Yadira Martinez, known simply as Yadi, was lying on the floor near the bedroom door. Yadi was partially unclothed. She was wearing nothing below the waist. Investigators believed that Yadi had been sexually assaulted. She had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a blunt object. Because Yadi was found near the doorway and blood spatter was present on the headboard of the bed, detectives concluded that the attack began while she was lying in bed. After the first blow, blood pooled around her head, and after the second, it sprayed outward, reaching the headboard. This indicated that the victim had been struck at least twice before being dragged off the bed. This conclusion was supported by drag marks and finger impressions found on Yadi's ankles. The perpetrator clearly did not seem particularly concerned about being arrested. He left behind numerous fingerprints, including even a palm print on the floor between the victim's legs. In one of the children's bedrooms at the other end of the house lay the body of Yadi and Arturo's daughter, 10-year-old Carla Martinez. Apparently, the girl had suffered the same fate as her mother. The bodies of both victims were transported for autopsy. It appeared that this was not a robbery, as all valuables were still in place. On the contrary, officers found something in Arturo's pickup truck that should not have been there. The vehicle was parked in the driveway, and in the open truck bed, officers discovered a lightweight jacket with white and red stripes. It was relatively clean, with no traces of dirt or dust, indicating that it had been placed there quite recently. Detectives showed the jacket to Christopher and asked whether he knew who it belonged to. The boy answered that he did not. However, there was blood on the jacket, and it was logged into evidence. The officers then began gathering information. They started with the neighbors who had gathered outside, confused about what could have happened during the night and why half the neighborhood had been cordoned off with yellow tape. Since the police were treating Arturo as a suspect, they questioned neighbors and family friends about the relationship between the spouses. Everyone, however, unanimously stated that Arturo and Yadi got along very well. They worked hard, attended church, and raised their children. Yadi had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She earned her degree, but around the same time she met Arturo, and the two moved together to Nevada. Overall, it was a fairly ordinary story. The couple came from Mexico to the United States in search of better opportunities. And because they were willing to work hard for that future, everything seemed to be going well for them. Arturo worked in construction, became an electrician, and had a good job with a stable income. Yadi also worked hard while raising the children. The couple bought a house. Together, they opened a boxing gym, something Arturo had long dreamed of. They instilled a strong work ethic in their children as well. Their 10-year-old daughter, Carla, or Carlita, practiced gymnastics and won competitions. Christopher did well in school and was described as a wonderful, well-mannered, and talented boy. The youngest child, Alejandro, was only 4 years old, and it was too early to speak of his abilities. In any case, according to neighbors, relatives, and friends, the family had no problems. On the other hand, who can truly know what happens behind closed doors, especially since the police found no signs of forced entry? In such cases, the perpetrator is usually someone the family knows or someone who was already inside the home. In other words, Arturo was becoming increasingly suspicious. Because Arturo stubbornly refused to answer questions, detectives began to believe that the murders of Yadi and Carla were the result of domestic violence. And if not for Christopher, who had the presence of mind to go to school and tell his teacher what had happened, it is unknown how long the truth about this horrific incident might have remained hidden. Christopher told investigators that the Saturday to Sunday evening had gone exactly as usual. The whole family went out to watch a boxing match. Since Arturo had drunk a little beer, Yadi took the wheel on the way back. The family returned home quite late. Everyone went to their rooms. Carla went to hers, and Christopher went into the room he shared with his younger brother. Shortly afterward, their mother came in, wished the children sweet dreams, and gently kissed them on the forehead. The children fell asleep. When Christopher woke up on Sunday morning and stepped out of the room, he could not believe his eyes. His father, covered in blood, was standing over Yadi's body. Christopher froze in shock. He saw that his mother was not moving and realized that she was dead. For a moment, he wondered whether his father might have done something to her. He asked him what had happened. The man looked at his son with tear-filled eyes, but could not bring himself to say a single word. Christopher noticed blood on his father's head and face and decided that he was injured. He thought he should find his older sister, likely hoping she would know what to do. The boy ran to her room, but found Carla lying on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Horrified, Christopher left the room and tried to find a phone to call 911, but he could not find one. He returned to his own room, to his younger brother. He lay down on the bed and burst into tears. He was in shock, but he knew he had to take care of Alejandro. After some time, his father entered their room. Christopher washed the blood from his father's hands. For most of Sunday, the man drifted in and out of consciousness. As soon as Monday morning arrived, Christopher got himself together and hurried to school, hoping someone there would help him. Before leaving, he told Alejandro to stay inside the house and strictly forbade him from going outside. Later that same day, Monday afternoon, the detective who had accompanied Arturo to the hospital finally learned why the man had refused to speak to the police. A doctor explained that Arturo had suffered 3 horrific blows to the head, most likely from a hammer. One of the strikes was so powerful that the hammer penetrated his skull all the way to the handle. The blow landed above the brainstem. By sheer luck, his brain was not crushed. As a result, Arturo developed aphasia, a loss of speech. In other words, he was not pretending. He truly could not utter a single word. It was absolutely certain that he could not have inflicted these injuries on himself in order to deflect suspicion. Delivering such blows would have required a full swing, pulling the arm back, which would have been impossible given the angles at which the man had been struck. Moreover, a hammer would not have penetrated the skull that deeply. But how did he survive such an attack? The explanation was that a powerful blow and heavy bleeding normally cause intracranial pressure, which could have killed him. However, the attacker struck him so violently that 2 open wounds, essentially 2 holes, were left in his skull. This, in effect, relieved the intracranial pressure. Of course, the killer did not plan this. It was a miracle that Arturo survived and managed to last an entire day before being taken to the hospital. Given the large amount of blood left on the couch in the family's living room, investigators concluded that Arturo lay down on the couch when the family returned home on Saturday evening. Most likely he fell asleep, especially since he had drunk some beer. The attacker cruelly took advantage of his defenseless state and struck the man twice on the left side, followed by the most devastating blow to the center of the back of his head. There was so much blood throughout the house because Arturo did not die. Instead, he wandered around in a dazed state. Due to aphasia, he was unable to speak and, of course, could not call for help. Thus, the rapist and murderer first attacked the man, the head of the household, who could have offered serious resistance. And when he believed he had killed Arturo, he turned his attention to the woman and the girl. For some reason, the killer did not harm the boys. Perhaps he did not know of their existence, or perhaps he simply chose not to kill them. Without delay, the medical examiner performed the autopsy and confirmed what the police already knew. Yadi had been struck on the head twice. The murder weapon, most likely a hammer, had penetrated her skull deeply, passing through the bone upon impact. Carla had also been beaten with a hammer. In addition, both victims, the mother and the daughter, had been sexually assaulted. DNA from an unknown individual was found in their bodies. This meant that once a suspect emerged, their DNA could be compared with the samples collected from the crime scene. For 2 days, the police worked tirelessly searching for leads. They learned that at the boxing gym, Arturo had a trainer with whom he had parted ways amid a scandal the previous November. Arturo had been forced to call the police to remove the trainer he had just fired. In a rage, the trainer had threatened to kill Arturo and his entire family. The police could not ignore such a threat and began looking for this individual. Fortunately, the officers who had removed the trainer from the gym recalled that his name was Salvador, and his nickname sounded like El Chapo, but they could not provide any further assistance. Records of Arturo's employees contained no additional information. However, a witness revealed to the detectives that the trainer had died in Mexico shortly after the confrontation with Arturo. It had seemed like a promising lead, but unfortunately, it went nowhere. The police had no leads to continue the investigation. Therefore, they were eager to find the murder weapon. They searched for it for 3 days. Judging by the fingerprints and DNA the killer had left behind, he had not made much effort to conceal his identity. This meant he could have discarded the hammer somewhere nearby. The officers first focused on searching every room in the house. They then expanded the search to the surrounding area. One of the officers climbed onto the cinder block wall surrounding the house. At the northern gate, he noticed blood. Since the cinder blocks had hollow cavities, the officer examined the wall and discovered a blood-stained hammer inside one of the cavities. While examining the area around the house, the officers also noticed a dusty trash bin, but the dust covered it unevenly. It looked as though someone had stepped on it to climb over the wall. What was especially curious was that both the dusty trash bin and the hammer were located along the boundary between the Martinez family's property and that of their neighbors, with whom, by an interesting coincidence, they had long-standing conflicts. The police decided to investigate whether the neighbors could have been involved in the murders. Obviously, as often happens, the conflict had started over a minor issue, but it escalated on the night from Saturday to Sunday, practically at the time of the killings. Witnesses reported hearing an argument unfold right in front of the Martinez house. The story was that late on Saturday night, when the family returned home, a neighbor's car was parked in their driveway, preventing Yadi from pulling in. Yadi entered the house with the children, while Arturo went to the neighbor's door to ask them to move the car, or perhaps not ask but demand, because the details of the conversation are unclear. Later, when the neighbor finally came out to move the car, he discovered a flat tire. Naturally, all the blame fell on Arturo. The neighbors argued again, raising their voices in a dispute that other neighbors could hear. Here's the most interesting part. The argument happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the family was attacked at 4, just 2 hours later. Considering the timing and the bloody trail leading to the Martinez house, detectives initially suspected that a neighbor, in a fit of rage, had attacked the family. This assumption matched the evidence at the crime scene, which suggested that the killer had acted without planning, was disorganized, and had simply attacked the first victims he encountered with whatever weapon was at hand. The investigators knocked on the neighbor's door. They readily confirmed that they had a long-standing conflict with Arturo, but nothing serious enough to justify murder. The detectives did not expect them to confess so easily. They conducted a search of the neighbor's house and collected their fingerprints and DNA. These needed to be compared with the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. The problem was that comparing DNA samples is a relatively lengthy process. To avoid losing time, the investigators examined other possible leads and discovered that on the same Saturday to Sunday night, just before the unknown intruder broke into the Martinez family home, another daring sexual assault had occurred less than a kilometer away. The police took interest in this because even in such a large city, the coincidence seemed too striking to ignore. Late at night on a deserted street less than a kilometer from the Martinez family home, a 50-year-old woman was walking. Her real name has not been disclosed, so we will call her Maria. She was heading in the direction of the Martinez residence. Since she was passing by a vacant lot in the middle of the night, Maria moved cautiously and occasionally looked around. She noticed a man on the opposite side of the street who began following her. Maria called emergency services and asked for help. The operator dispatched a patrol car, but unfortunately, the officers did not arrive in time. The man dragged Maria into the vacant lot and began undressing her. Since the dispatcher remained on the line, she heard the brutal attack unfolding and immediately called in helicopters, K-9 units, and all available patrol officers. The sound of sirens startled the assailant, preventing him from completing the attack and leaving his DNA behind. Fortunately, Maria managed to pick up a stone, twist free, and strike the perpetrator on the head with full force. Blood sprayed into her jacket. The attacker was wounded, heard the approaching patrol sirens, and realized he needed to flee. He grabbed the victim's phone and ran, heading toward Arturo and Yadi's house. He was fleeing the police and helicopters and needed to hide somewhere. Investigators quickly reviewed surveillance footage capturing the unknown suspect. He was wearing a light, bright jacket with red and white stripes, the same jacket found in the open bed of Arturo's pickup. This was a major lead. The suspect was also wearing a baseball cap, which likely fell off when Maria struck him with the stone. Investigators concluded that the attack on Maria, less than a kilometer from the Martinez home, was only the beginning. Incensed but unable to finish what he had started, the perpetrator did not simply wait in some yard for the police to leave. He entered the first house he could find, attempted to kill Arturo, attacked the mother and daughter, and ultimately killed them. Forensic specialists quickly collected a DNA sample from Maria's jacket to identify her assailant. It should not be forgotten that the suspect, for some reason, took the victim's phone and, even more surprisingly, used it. After Maria had contacted emergency services, 3 more calls were made from her phone. Of course, they were not made by her. The perpetrator in particular contacted a man named Gary Harris. Gary works at a local casino. He recalled that on that night, he had indeed received a call from a childhood friend known by the nickname Junior, but whose real name is Brian Clay. He was 22 years old. Brian did not have a long criminal record, but one incident in his past revealed something about his character. His girlfriend had become pregnant and was expecting his child. When he found out, Brian pushed her to the floor and kicked her in the stomach, attempting to provoke a miscarriage. While assaulting her, he shouted at her to make it clear that he did not want the child. This incident made Brian the prime suspect in the murder of Yadi and Carla. The problem was locating him. On the 27th, however, his mother, fearing that her son might be involved in the crime, called the police and reported that he was hiding at her home. Thus, 11 days after the start of the investigation, detectives arrested Brian at his mother's house. During interrogation, Brian attempted to rely on a lapse in memory. He claimed that he had been drinking and possibly using illegal substances that night, and therefore remembered nothing. But this was, of course, a lie. At the very least, when he attacked Maria and heard the police sirens, he realized he needed to flee. After the murders of Carla and Yadi and the attack on Arturo, he had the presence of mind to climb the cinder block wall and hide the hammer inside one of the blocks. In other words, he was not so intoxicated that he forgot to hide the murder weapon. Detectives showed the young man photographs and reminded him of what he had done to Yadi and Carla, but not a trace of remorse crossed Brian's face. He admitted to nothing. Fortunately, the results of the DNA comparisons arrived in time. The DNA from both crime scenes matched Brian. He was arrested and, in addition, charged with multiple acts of violence, assault, and 2 murders. He remained in custody but did not face trial for several years, as his attorneys delayed proceedings by filing various motions and petitions. All of these requests were denied. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and Brian Clay was ultimately found guilty. However, the jury did not have the heart to impose the death penalty. On December 5, 2017, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Not all family members agreed with this decision. They could not understand what else Brian Clay would have had to do to receive a death sentence. In any case, executions had not been carried out in Nevada since 2006, so the practical outcome would have been the same. Brian Clay will spend the rest of his life in prison. As for Arturo Martinez, he managed to recover from the horrific attack. He returned to work as an electrician and began a new chapter in life by remarrying. His heart still carries the pain of loss, but as a devout Catholic, he found the strength to forgive Brian. Christopher, though burdened by heavy memories, decided to move forward. In May 2022, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy to protect others and help prevent tragedies from happening again. The memory of his mother and sister lives on in his heart, and their love and support have become his guiding compass in life.